Stand at the edge of a clear mountain lake for a moment. Observe how the surface simultaneously reflects the sky above while revealing glimpses of the world below. Feel the cool liquid against your skin, yielding to your touch, yet possessing immense power to shape even the hardest stone through persistent flow. This is water energy in its most elemental form, reflective, penetrating, yielding, yet powerful. As you experience this fluid mystery, you connect not merely with H2O, but with the psychological quality that gives depth and meaning to human experience. The capacity for emotional resonance and intuitive knowing that allows us to feel rather than merely think, to sense rather than merely analyze. Water represents our fundamental psychological need for depth, the requirement for sufficient emotional connection, intuitive wisdom, and adaptive fluidity to navigate the ever-changing currents of life with both resilience and grace. Without this deepening element, Earth's stability becomes rigid mechanism rather than living foundation. Fire's passion becomes consuming intensity without heart or meaning, and air's concepts become abstract theories disconnected from lived experience. Water provides the essential depth that transforms existence from mere functioning into meaningful participation in the fullness of being. In a culture that often celebrates rational thinking, controlled emotional expression, and empirical knowledge, water's mysterious wisdom can seem irrational, even threatening. We rarely honor those who navigate by feeling as highly as those guided by reason, who trust intuitive knowing alongside analytical thinking, who maintain emotional authenticity rather than strategic presentation. Yet without this deepening element, all other forms of psychological development remain surface-level achievements. Impressive perhaps in their own domains, but lacking the profound resonance that gives human experience its richest meaning. This chapter explores water as psychological energy, the deepening force that enables emotional intelligence, intuitive perception, empathic connection, and the fluid adaptability that allows graceful navigation of life's inevitable changes. We'll examine water's distinctive strengths and challenges, its manifestations in daily life, and practical approaches to cultivating healthy water energy according to your unique needs and circumstances. Through this exploration, you may discover that what appears most vulnerable, the capacity to feel deeply, to trust the knowing that emerges from beneath conscious thought, to connect heart to heart beyond words, actually represents one of the most powerful dimensions of human capability. Beneath the surface expressions of human experience lies a fundamental quality that gives meaning and resonance to existence, the capacity for feeling. This quality manifests through several interconnected dimensions that together create the psychological depth that transforms mere living into fully human being. At its core, emotional intelligence begins with awareness, the capacity to recognize and name feelings with nuance, rather than suppressing or being overwhelmed by them. This reflective consciousness allows you to use emotions as valuable information about your needs, values, and responses to situations rather than treating them as irrational disruptions to be controlled. Without this emotional clarity, experiences remain incompletely processed, creating either disconnection from important signals or submersion in overwhelming feelings without the clarity needed for integration. Consider for a moment how fundamentally your emotional awareness shapes your experience. When you encounter challenging situations, your ability to recognize specific emotions, whether anxiety, signaling potential threat, anger, indicating boundary violation, sadness, revealing loss, or shame pointing to threatened social connection, determines whether you can respond appropriately or find yourself reacting in ways disconnected from the actual circumstances. This emotional clarity creates the foundation for both self-regulation and authentic connection. Some people naturally recognize subtle gradations of feeling, distinguishing between similar but distinct emotions like disappointment versus discouragement, irritation versus anger, or contentment versus joy. Others experience emotions in more global terms like good or bad, or may recognize feelings only once they've become intense enough to override habitual suppression. These differences profoundly affect everything from stress management to relationship quality to decision-making capacity. Neuroscience research on affective processing helps explain these variations through studies of interoception, the perception of internal bodily states that forms the foundation of emotional experience. This research reveals how emotional awareness isn't merely conceptual understanding but embodied recognition of physiological changes accompanying different feeling states. People with developed interoceptive capacity literally feel emotions more clearly because they more accurately perceive the bodily signals, changes in heart rate, breathing patterns, muscle tension, gut sensations that constitute the physical component of emotional experience. Developing emotional awareness involves both expanding your emotional vocabulary and strengthening bodily attention. Learning to recognize and name increasingly subtle distinctions in feeling states while simultaneously becoming more sensitive to the physical sensations that accompany different emotions. This dual development creates increasingly sophisticated emotional intelligence that provides valuable guidance across all dimensions of experience. This emotional clarity grows through regular attention to your feeling states, without immediate judgment about their acceptability or rationality. Simply noticing what emotions arise in different situations, what physical sensations accompany them, what needs or values they might signal, and how they naturally shift when given conscious attention rather than either suppression or indulgence. These observations gradually build both the neural pathways and psychological capacity for increasingly nuanced emotional awareness. Beyond personal emotional awareness, feeling involves empathy, the capacity to sense and understand others' emotional experiences without becoming overwhelmed by them or projecting your own feelings onto them. This connective quality allows you to create authentic relationships based on genuine understanding rather than mere proximity or utility. Without this empathic bridge, human connections remain superficial transactions rather than meaningful bonds, limiting both personal fulfillment and collective wisdom. Consider how dramatically empathy transforms your interactions and relationships. When connecting with someone experiencing difficulty, your ability to temporarily step into their emotional landscape, to sense not just their external circumstances but their internal experience, determines whether your response feels supportive or invalidating, connecting or isolating. This empathic understanding creates possibilities for genuine meeting beyond mere problem-solving or advice-giving. Your relationship with empathy significantly influences your capacity for meaningful connection. Some people naturally attune to others' emotional states, sensing subtle shifts in feeling beyond what words alone convey, creating spaces where others feel genuinely seen and understood. Others struggle with empathic connection, either remaining distanced from others' emotional reality or becoming so merged that they lose appropriate boundaries between self and other. These differences profoundly affect relationship satisfaction, conflict resolution, leadership effectiveness, and community building. Neuroscience research on mirror neurons provides insight into the biological foundations of empathy through studies of neural systems that activate when observing others' experiences, creating internal simulations that allow direct rather than merely cognitive understanding. This research reveals how empathy isn't merely conceptual perspective-taking, but embodied resonance, a neurological capacity to literally feel with others through shared neural activation patterns. Developing empathic capacity involves both expanding emotional range and refining boundary awareness, strengthening your ability to connect with increasingly diverse emotional experiences while maintaining clear distinction between your feelings and others. This balanced development creates healthy empathy that builds connection without creating either distancing detachment or enmeshed confusion between self and other. This empathic intelligence grows through practices of present, attuned listening without immediate agenda to fix, change, or judge others' experiences. Simply creating space where others can express their full reality while you maintain both emotional receptivity and appropriate boundaries. These experiences gradually build both the neural sensitivity and psychological skill required for mature empathy that connects without merging, understands without absorbing, and supports without controlling. Beneath conscious reasoning lies intuition, the capacity to access knowledge through channels other than logical analysis, to sense patterns and possibilities below the threshold of explicit awareness. This intuitive intelligence allows you to navigate complex situations where complete information isn't available, or where multiple factors create complexity exceeding what sequential reasoning can process. Without this depth of knowing, decision-making remains limited to what can be explicitly articulated and logically analyzed, missing the integrated wisdom that emerges from the full range of human perception. Consider how essential intuition is for effective navigation of life's complexity. In relationships, career decisions, creative endeavors, or potential risk assessment, your ability to sense what feels right or wrong beyond what you can immediately explain, to register subtle signals that haven't yet reached conscious articulation, often provides guidance that proves accurate, despite initially appearing without logical foundation. This intuitive knowing creates access to wisdom beyond the limitations of conscious processing capacity. Your relationship with intuition significantly influences your decision-making effectiveness and creative potential. Some people naturally trust and develop their intuitive capacities, learning to distinguish between genuine intuitive signals and wishful thinking or fear-based projections. Others dismiss intuitive knowing as irrational or unreliable, relying exclusively on explicit analysis, despite its inherent limitations in handling complexity and novelty. These differences profoundly affect adaptability to changing circumstances, capacity for innovation, and ability to make sound decisions with incomplete information. Neuroscience research on unconscious processing helps explain intuition's power through studies of how the brain continuously processes vast amounts of information below the threshold of awareness, identifying patterns and making predictions based on accumulated experience without requiring conscious attention. This research reveals how intuition isn't magical thinking, but the result of sophisticated parallel processing that considers far more variables than sequential consciousness could possibly track. Developing intuitive intelligence involves both strengthening signal recognition and refining discernment. Learning to notice subtle intuitive impressions before they're overridden by louder conscious processes, while simultaneously developing the ability to distinguish genuine intuition from fear, wishful thinking, or habitual response. This balanced development creates increasingly reliable intuitive wisdom that complements rather than replaces analytical thinking. This intuitive capacity grows through practices that temporarily quiet the dominant voice of analytical reasoning, creating space through meditation, time in nature, creative engagement, or physical activities that induce flow states, while simultaneously developing empirical feedback systems that track intuitive hits and misses to refine accuracy over time. These experiences gradually build both the neural pathways and psychological trust required for sophisticated intuitive intelligence that integrates with, rather than opposes, rational analysis. Emotional awareness would leave us perpetually at the mercy of feeling states without regulation, the capacity to work with emotional energies skillfully rather than being controlled by them. This regulatory intelligence allows you to experience emotions fully while maintaining the ability to choose effective responses rather than automatic reactions. Without this balanced relationship with feeling, emotional life becomes either overwhelming flood or rigid suppression, neither of which allows the wisdom and energy of emotions to inform and vitalize experience. Consider how fundamentally emotional regulation shapes your effectiveness and well-being. When facing situations that naturally evoke strong feelings, whether conflict, loss, threat, or even intense positive experiences, your ability to feel these emotions without being submerged by them determines whether you can respond with wisdom rather than merely react from the emotion itself. This regulatory capacity creates the psychological flexibility essential for navigating life's inevitable emotional complexities. Some people naturally maintain what therapist Daniel Siegel calls the window of tolerance, the zone between hyper-arousal and hypo-arousal, where feelings provide information and energy without dominating consciousness. Others fluctuate between emotional flooding, where feelings overwhelm rational capacity, and emotional constriction, where important signals are suppressed or denied. These differences profoundly affect stress management, conflict resolution, and overall psychological well-being. Neuroscience research on polyvagal theory, developed by Stephen Porges, illuminates the neurophysiological foundations of emotional regulation through understanding how different branches of the autonomic nervous system create varying bodily states that enable or prevent effective engagement with emotional experience. This research reveals how regulation isn't merely psychological control, but involves actual neural and physiological states that either support or undermine balanced relationship with feelings. Developing regulatory capacity involves both expanding your window of tolerance and cultivating specific regulatory skills, gradually building ability to maintain presence with increasingly intense emotions while developing diverse techniques for modulating emotional states when necessary. This balanced development creates sophisticated emotional regulation that neither suppresses nor surrenders to feelings, but works with their energy and information skillfully. within contexts that provide appropriate support, gradually engaging with increasingly difficult feelings while having access to both internal and external resources that prevent overwhelm. These experiences systematically expand regulatory capacity through what psychologists call the zone of proximal development, the growth edge, where challenge meets capability in ways that build new capacity rather than either boring with too little challenge or overwhelming with too much. Life's constantly changing circumstances require adaptability, the capacity to flow with rather than against unavoidable change, to modify approach based on emerging conditions rather than rigidly maintaining plans regardless of their effectiveness. This adaptive intelligence allows you to maintain core integrity while adjusting form to meet changing realities like water that remains essentially itself, whether flowing as river, resting as lake, rising as vapor, or crystallizing as ice. Without this fluid responsiveness, effectiveness diminishes as contexts evolve beyond the conditions where original strategies developed. Consider how essential adaptability is for sustainable effectiveness in any domain. In relationships, career, parenting, or personal development, circumstances inevitably change in ways impossible to fully anticipate, presenting novel challenges and opportunities that couldn't have been included in original plans. To release strategies that no longer serve despite previous investment, to discover creative pathways around obstacles rather than merely forcing through them. These adaptive capacities determine whether you evolve with changing realities or find yourself fighting increasingly misaligned battles. Your relationship with change significantly influences your long-term effectiveness and satisfaction. Some people naturally approach change with curious engagement, seeing evolving circumstances as invitations to creative adaptation rather than unwelcome disruptions to predetermined paths. Others experience change primarily as threat or loss, creating resistance that consumes energy better invested in discovering how to flow with rather than against inevitable transitions. These differences profoundly affect everything from stress levels to relationship longevity to career sustainability to creative contribution. Research on complex adaptive systems provides insight into why adaptability proves so essential in our interconnected world. These studies reveal how optimal functioning in complex environments requires requisite variety, sufficient internal flexibility to meet external variability, and appropriate response, actions calibrated to actual conditions rather than rigid adherence to predetermined plans. This research illuminates why adaptability represents not weakness or inconsistency, but sophisticated engagement with reality's inherent unpredictability. Developing adaptive capacity involves both strengthening psychological flexibility and practicing strategic improvisation. Building comfort with uncertainty and change while developing the ability to create effective responses to novel situations without requiring complete security or perfect information. This balanced development creates increasingly sophisticated adaptability that maintains purpose and integrity while adjusting specific approaches to match actual rather than merely anticipated conditions. This adaptive intelligence grows through deliberate engagement with controlled uncertainty, placing yourself in situations with moderate unpredictability that require creative response without overwhelming current capacity, gradually expanding comfort with change through successful navigation of increasingly novel circumstances. These experiences systematically build both the psychological tolerance and practical skill required for genuine adaptability that flows with rather than fights against life's inevitable changes.